I grew up where I could not go to school with white people, if you will. I could not eat in restaurants with white people. Um, One of the fights I had as a student is we marched on the cafeteria in the state capitol in Little Rock. It was segregated. Black people could not eat there. So, as a citizen, not only of the United States, but of the city of Little Rock, yeah, I had a certain place as an African American. I couldn't do many things. I was, shortly before going to Vietnam, I went to a bowling alley for the first time in my life. Not because I didn't want to go bowling, but there was no black bowling alley in Little Rock. So I had to wait until the desegregation laws were passed and it was no longer legal to keep me out of the bowling alley. And that went for the movie theater, the public swimming pool, on and almost any public facility. African Americans could not use those facilities. So now all of a sudden here I am fighting for what, freedom? I'm being asked to kill people in the name of freedom. Well, whose freedom? So unless you're, completely brain dead, you'd have to think about it. And that's where I was. I thought a lot about it and why am I doing this? I don't know these people. They don't know me. They haven't done anything to me. My fight is really at home.
They had military people who acted sort of like village mayors, and those, they were captains mostly, but there were some majors, had a certain number of Vietnamese troops assigned to them. And then they had a U.S. advisory package. And that package was made up of U.S. military and guys like me. I was a first lieutenant at the time, and we lived with the captain that was in charge of this district, and we advised him and his military forces when we went out on military operations. But when we weren't on military operations, we would assist him with the local medical people in the villages, with the local, there were no engineers to speak of, but just the local people who had to build the footbridges and this, that, and the other. We were there not just for their military operations, but to help them, I hate the term nation build, but we really were trying to show them the goodness of government. And they were very distrustful. The Vietnamese people were very distrustful. In the daytime, they had to put up with the taxes and the impositions of the government of Vietnam. At night, they had to put up with the taxes and the impositions of the Viet Cong, who were coming for their resources. And so it was very confusing for the Vietnamese people. Ours was ostensibly an effort to try to show that government was good, that we were really trying to help them. And we did that on a military front, but also on a medical front, on a civic action front. We were nation building, no, village building, maybe, I don't know.
The war for the Vietnam people was horrific. They had been fighting since forever. They had been colonized more than 150 years ago by the French. The French had divided the country into three portions for colonial administration. When the French surrendered to the Germans in World War II, the Japanese marched in. And without having to fight. The French were at peace with Germany, and so the French let the Japanese use the aerodromes and the ports to prosecute the war in southern China. When the Japanese surrendered, the French returned. And the Vietnamese were again faced with an occupying colonial force. And when the French lost at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, we were in the center of that containment domino theory policy concerning world communism, and we immediately bolstered the French by moving in, partitioning the country, which had happened in North and South Korea, East and West Germany, Eastern and Western Europe. there were supposed to be free elections after the French pulled out the Geneva Conference. And we were as much party to not allowing that to happen because it became very apparent that Ho Chi Minh would win. 80% of the people in Vietnam liked him, and 80% of those people weren't even communists. But we were so afraid of worldwide communism spreading one thing and another. We couldn't allow that to happen.
By 1969, 1970, the war had become so repugnant to the American people that our commanders were just flat told, we cannot tolerate American casualties. And yet we still have to have results for our presence. We had certain body count requirements where we were expected to kill so many of the enemy, and we had as a resource these B-52 Arc-Light attacks where scores of B-52 bombers with 500-pound bombs would be given a designated impact area on the ground where the ground forces, the U.S. forces, would say, the enemy is here, or their caves are here.
I would go into the tunnels with a 45 caliber pistol, a flashlight. I'd have a smoke grenade usually taped to my left ankle, and possibly a Bowie knife. And I would look around, see who's home. Look for documents, look for weapons, try to see how big the tunnel complex is, try to get an idea of if it's been used, if it's not being used.
We used to recon by fire with arc lights, which was a very expensive way, but it was a very safe way to save American lives. And when you drop that much ordnance in an area where there are known enemy people, you're going to win every time.
The more I searched tunnels, the more I realized that, you don't dig this intensely and then just roll over and give up. I don't care what your political ideology was. The tunnels were being built long before supposedly the communists came along. I mean, they were fighting the French for a long time. They've been digging tunnels for a long time.
The thing that I didn't like was we were being asked to plot some of those targets in areas where I, as the intelligence specialist at the time, was pretty sure there wasn't any enemy out there. There were no friendlies out there. I don't even think there were any monkeys out there. But still, there were pressures to do things like that, which I didn't think was a very economical way of fighting the war. And yet the pressures on the people who asked me to do that were such, and I always had a clear conscience about the way I plotted those, because I knew that there was no good guy was going to be out there unless he was lost.
People from my generation who experienced, no matter on what side they were in the Vietnam War, if they were following their conscience, whether they were serving or not serving, and they were paying attention, I think that generation has gotten far more observant foreign policy, far more critical of government. We've turned into a generation, in many instances, of watchdogs, saying, wait a minute. You're going down the same path that led us into a position where we were demolishing the fiber of this country. I always thought, coming out of that World War II generation of children, that saw their parents coming back from the war and had those stories, that we were always the good guys, that we stood for, with the old Superman thing, truth, justice, and the American way. And after the Gulf of Tonkin, after the Pentagon Papers, and after so many of the things that happened, and we realized that the government had not been forthcoming, that in effect they had lied, that innocence, that sense of we are the champions, one thing and another, that was kind of tarnished and banged up a little bit. Maybe we were naive.
When we were out on the second position under the Marines, I had the capability of supporting any of the infantry companies out there as well. And I can recall having just arrived, maybe the second day there, hearing a call from fire on the radio, and a forward observer screaming out, they're 100 meters, and closing, please fire. Somebody fire and support, and we'll give the coordinates. And I was under the Marine plan called Sabre Plane. If I would have to apply for permission to fire from the Marines, and they would clear the fire to allow me to go ahead and fire. And if there were a jet, Marine jet in the air, they would say Sabre plane denied. It wouldn't let me fire. And I can recall this very first time where I could hear the shooting, I could hear the screaming, I could hear the whole action. And the Marines were denying me to fire and support. And I felt so helpless, and we kept on trying to apply to fire. And then there was silence, and no more screaming, and no more anybody calling for help. And you don't really know what happened. You don't really know whether they lived, but you can only guess they probably did not. That happened again, second time. Somebody, once again, being overrun, an infantry unit out doing a reconnaissance and caught in a trap. And again, I applied to fire and was told Sabre plane. And this time I said, the hell with it. They can court-martial me, but I'm going to go fire and support. I'm not going to let anybody die again. You learned after a while in Vietnam that you were there to support each other, and the rules were guidelines, but when it came to action, you knew better than anybody else what to do. And the last thing you wanted to do was not be able to live with yourself and the guys around you.